Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Math. So, Tarek and our continuing series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time, and today we're playing Jetwave by Konami. Now, this is definitely not one of my favorite games of all time. It's firmly in the C tier as far as arcade racing games is concerned, but it is still a fun game to check out and one that you're barely ever going to see on arcade floors again. Sometimes it felt like Konami was trying to follow the trends. Namco and Sega had jet ski racing games, so why wouldn't Konami? Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. But Jetwave is basically an arcade racing game on a jet ski, but it is definitely one of Konami's jankier arcade efforts. In this era, there was two Konamis, the ones that would release absolute arcade hits, and the one that would release something like Jetwave. That's not to say this is not a fun or good game, it just pales in comparison to pretty much every other developer's attempt at having a jet ski racing game. From the water physics to the camera to pretty much everything about this game, it kind of feels like it's holding together with wood screws and a little bit of a prayer. But it is still a fun racing game. The great thing is it does work well in MAME. Now, I have played this game on an original arcade cabinet, and I did look at original arcade footage before I ran this, and this is pretty much what you would be getting on an arcade cabinet as well, so this is how it's supposed to run. It's definitely fast and you get a great sensation of speed, but it's also incredibly twitchy. But that's kind of what you got with Konami when it came to 3D arcade games in the earlier 90s. This game came out in 1996 and it definitely pales in comparison to anything Namco or Sega were putting on the arcade floors. Now this runs on the GTI Club class of hardware and it doesn't really have a name. Sometimes Konami would name their boards after bugs, sometimes they would name them after letters, and sometimes the name would just be the first game that ran on them, in this case GTI Club. But Jetwave here is definitely not a bad game. It was a really interesting arcade cabinet and the controls work when you have a gigantic jet ski underneath you. But because we don't have that same weight when we're playing in MAME, the steering can be a little bit more drastic than you would want it to be. But that's the interesting thing about the history of arcades. 3D definitely had to come to fruition, and for Konami it definitely came a few years later than Sega or Namco. They always seem to struggle a little bit. Now, GTI Club is an absolutely spectacular racing game that unfortunately doesn't work well in MAME, but that was Konami doing well with 3D. Something like Jetwave, though, is them definitely struggling to get into that racing mode, which is interesting because GTI Club was so good, but the steering and the other performance here is just a little bit weird, but we still got a second place finish, so we can put our initials up on the screen and go on to the next area. But it was really hard to see something like this next to everything else that ran around it. You do get a selection of different characters in all, and they do have different performance aspects. You'll see here for beginner, for expert, such as that. And you also have courses to choose from, 3, which is pretty much your standard fare when it comes to an arcade racing game. I wish there was a couple more courses in here, and honestly most of them are relatively easy when you actually get into the meat and potatoes of them. And of course you also get a really fun track sequence because it wouldn't be an arcade game without one. But take a look at the waves here, just kind of how they undulate. They've got such a weird, unnatural look to them. This was something that was always difficult to deal with in 3D in the 90s, actual water physics. And Sega and Namco definitely had them beat by a long shot when it came to accurate waves. But think of something like this, and then think of another game that is synonymous with jet ski racing that has some of the best water of the 90s of all times. I'm talking about Wave Race 64. These waves are running on Nintendo 64 in the same year that Jetwave came out from Konami, and you can tell the difference immediately. But let's take a look at another jet ski, and I will say that the for beginner to the for advanced jet skis all seem to control relatively the same in my opinion. I know that says wave stars on the side, but for some reason I always thought it said waffle stars, which is just kind of funny. The one nice thing is all 3 of the courses are well designed, they've got some great turns, and there is a lot of fun in the racing to be had. It's just really interesting to look at something that was out at the exact same time as Wave Race 64 on the Nintendo 64 and see how fundamentally different it truly is. And of course it is Konami, so you get a decent soundtrack. Go ahead and listen for 35 seconds, I'll come back and tell you more about the history of this game. But enjoy! Definitely some intense music there, but it does work for the game, and maybe I've been slightly harsh on Jetwave. I'm not saying this game isn't fun. The racing mechanics, the handling, everything about it does give you that good sensation of speed, and in the first person mode, weaving in and out of the scenery here definitely has a good frame rate to it. It's not that this isn't a good game, it's just that it's not as good of a game as any other jet ski game in arcades or on the home console market at that point in time. And that is what I mean when I say Konami definitely struggled with the early days of 3D, and they always felt like they were trying to play catch up because Sega had a jet ski game, Namco had a jet ski game, of course Konami was going to have one as well. And they were definitely a mixed bag when it came to trying to be in the same genre. Something like Evil Knight compared to the House of the Dead, I absolutely love Evil Knight. I think it's every bit as good. Something like Jetwave compared to any of the games that Sega made, definitely nowhere near as good. So this is one of those things. Konami was always either hitting home runs or bunting the ball into a foul. There was nothing in between. And again, I got another second place finish, so I can put my initials back up onto the screen. But I will say, no matter what difficulty I ever set this at, I have never seen a first place finish. It seems like there's some balance issue that keeps you from actually getting that first place trophy. I don't know what it is, but it always seems to just give me that vibe. And I love this rudimentary model here telling you to hit start. It looks like it's 8 polygons just strung together, and the jet ski is maybe 16. But let's take one of those expert craft out and see if it handles any differently, because at least as far as I can tell in the feel, these are doing the exact same thing. But of course, this was a gigantic amusement cabinet, so maybe there was more resistance motors inside of it that aren't in my controller, and I don't remember how it felt. We'll move over to Expert here as well, and I would definitely say that the Expert and Pro are a little bit muddled. I'm not sure if Expert is the middle course or if Pro is the middle course, because I would say this one feels harder, even though I think it is the medium course. So as we get into this third race, I do like all of the colors, I like the jumps, I like the time bonuses, I like the bump and run racing aspect of this as well. It's definitely a fun time. It just doesn't rise to the level of what you would expect out of Konami in the mid-90s, because they could be every bit as good as Sega or Namco or Midway. They just couldn't be that good consistently, and that's always been something really interesting. But if you watch the channel and know anything about me, you know I love Konami arcade hardware, especially on the 3D side, where they were using all of these interesting chips, because this runs on a DSP or digital signal processor for the 3D, not any sort of bespoke 3D chip. So it is a very interesting piece of arcade history from a hardware design perspective as well. I just wish that it was a little bit wetter, I wish it was a little bit more well designed, and I wish the graphics definitely held up a little bit more, because these water effects definitely don't sell the overall idea that you are in the ocean. It feels like you're kind of just driving around this really rubbly pavement, but when you go through this little tunnel here, it does have moments in which it shines. And that is why Jetwave is definitely in that mid-tier of arcade games. It's not bad, it's not good, it just exists. And as far as the arcade cabinet is concerned, if you know where there is one of these, leave me a comment down below, because I haven't seen one for a very long time and I would love to experience it again. But this was not successful when it hit the arcade floor, so it was rare back then, and it definitely isn't getting any more common right now, but I do love those dolphins that come up into the waves. Well, that's the fun part about the history of arcade games. They're not just littered with 10 out of 10 hits, those Hall of Fame first ballot games we all know, love, and remember. There's also Jetwaves among the mix of those games. Maybe you saw it once, maybe you played it, maybe you enjoyed it, maybe you completely forgot it existed until you watched this video, but tell me down below, have you ever played this game, because I would be genuinely curious. I've only ever played it once. It was a fun time when I played it on the cabinet, and I never came back to it again outside of unported playlists. So that's one of those titles. It's a fun thing to talk about, but it might be more fun to talk about than actually play. We'll see here, I got a third place finish and we're pretty much done. But if you do see a Jetwave cabinet, definitely throw a few quarters in, because it's not getting any less rare. Throw your initials up on the screen and it might be the last time you ever see one. Short of that, we'll see you next time with more unported playlists, but we are done. I'll have videos throughout the week. And again, if you see this game, definitely play it. Bye-bye.